What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Debbie Rao YouTube channel. We're back with another top 25 edition of our college football series. We are rounding out the top 12 in that area, and we got Oklahoma on deck today. We're going to be talking about the Oklahoma Sooners. Didn't have the greatest year last year, but we do think, like we talked about pre-show, they're pretty underrated. So we're going to be getting into their depth charts on both sides, how they can address those defensive concerns that they had last year. What does Brent Venables have in store for their last year in the Big 12 before they head over to the SEC? So they want to do better this year. So we're going to be diving into that. Hit that like and subscribe button. Hang in there if you like college football. You're ready for the season to start. If you're an Oklahoma fan, we appreciate you. You stay here. Let's talk about your team. All right. So like I said last year, Oklahoma finished 6-7. Not what they were, not what they wanted after the year one of, no Lincoln Riley. They got Brent Venables there, from Clemson, defensive coordinator, and it didn't work out the way they thought. Dylan Gabriel had a pretty good year. We'll get into that. Eric Gray had a great year. We're Eric Gray stands here on this show. And he kind of came out of there, but realistically, they just didn't defensively, didn't really pan out. And you're looking at just the games, losing to Kansas State, TCU, and Texas. Those aren't necessarily bad losses. TCU made the playoff. Texas, you don't want to lose 49-0. We'll get into that. But in Kansas State, they won the Big 12. So I think that overall, very inconsistent at times. That defense definitely took a step back. But let's get into this year. What do they got? What are we looking at in that offensive line? And let's start there.
Yeah, so Andrew Rame is the only returning starter. He played pretty well last year. Tyler Guyton rotated in for over 400 snaps, so I think they feel pretty comfortable about him at right tackle. Savion Byrd rotated in a little bit. I think the highlight of this offensive line, though, is the two transfers, Walter Rouse and Caleb Schaefer. Rouse, 4 years at Stanford, good player, just part of Stanford football, so don't really get a whole lot of recognition out there, rightfully so. And then Caleb Schaefer is in from Miami of Ohio. Is that correct? Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
Miami of Ohio. Okay player. I think, if you have concerns about this offensive line, it's those two guards. But I think having, the two bookend tackles, the solid piece and Rame in the center, I think they have to feel pretty good about this offensive line, despite losing Anton Harrison and Wanya Morris, those are two big losses. But I think that Oklahoma is one of those programs that they can kind of fill in, and I think they did a good job hitting the portal to do that this year.
Yeah, and before we get into any unruly fans in the comments, these are all projected offensive lines. So, we do understand, I think it's McCade Mature. He is actually fighting for Caleb Schaefer's spot the last time I looked today. So, they're really close right there. They're taking reps. They're going to have that battle. But no, you're right. Walter Rouse is good, and I think that's exactly what they needed to kind of shore up that offensive line. So that's really good for them. You have to really like that about these guys and where they're at. And you got to like Guyton, 6'7", 327, big boy, big and you got to be there. Now let's get into their offense. So let's talk about kind of what we expect from Oklahoma. I think the big thing is Dylan Gabriel. I think when you're looking at Dylan was fine last year. I thought there was times he was inconsistent, 62% completion percentage, but he did have 3,000 yards, 25 touchdowns, 6 interceptions there. Their strength is in the running back room. I love these two guys. I love Javonte Barnes and I love Gavin Sawchuk. And I know Barnes with his I think it was a spring injury with his leg. It seems like he's on the mend there. Those two are very good, and that two tandem right there. And Javonte has NFL, I think, potential. Those two guys they're going to have to lean on a little bit more this year. I think they're going to have more of a 1-2 punch with those guys, Thunder and Lightning, for lack of better terms there. And in the wide receiver room, I think that overall they did address it in the transfer portal. Andrew Anthony, Brendan Thompson. We like Jaleel Farouk. I know I've always been a kind of a Farouk guy. I thought he came on pretty good there at the end of the year last year. But overall, what is your big takeaway about this kind of depth chart? What are you seeing?
Yeah, I think, a lot of people are excited about Jackson Arnold. Dylan Gabriel's probably going to start there, for as long as he's healthy. I'm someone who loves Jackson Arnold, but the problem is Gabriel has struggled to stay healthy throughout his career. So I think they feel pretty good about what they've got behind him. Javonte Barnes had a good year last year. I don't think he got as much run as maybe he deserved, over 500 yards last year. I think, when you had Eric Gray there, you didn't really need to pivot to another option. And then Jaleel Farouk, you mentioned him, but that's a player that I think is going to take another
Yeah.
massive step forward. He's one of those guys that he consistently gets open. I think there were some issues with his hands and drops last year, but I think another year in this offense and we'll get some more consistency from him. And I think that's the type of guy that they want as their number one option. Transfer, I'm excited to see Andrew Anthony too. I know
Yeah.
that's your boy from Michigan. So
Yeah.
overall, this is a good group of skill players.
Good group. Hey, Austin Stogner's back, so we got to shout out him. He's back from the South Carolina, Traverse, and he was getting a little NFL buzz a couple years ago. So it is, yeah. I think offensively they should be as what they were last year. Like when overall looking at kind of how they finished and what they were good last year. I think defensively is where they struggled, and that's kind of why you saw that dip for them. But they did rank 5th in the conference at 32.8 points per game. They were right there. They had them. Overall, like their big losses: Anton Harrison, Morris as well. I think Marvin Mims was a big one, especially before you saw him get drafted, and Eric Gray. But again, I don't think they're losses that you can't overcome from, especially going 6-7, right? Like from notable losses, like, yeah, they're big. I think Eric Gray, yeah, that's a big loss, 1,300 yards rushing. But with Sawchuk and Barnes there, you could probably replicate that pretty easily. Marvin Mims, they talked about Andrew, these other guys stepping in. I think they're more well-rounded, but obviously the offensive line is something kind of to know.
Yeah, for sure. Like you said, I think they've done a good job in acquiring players that can fill these holes. I think the Marvin Mims one is interesting because I'm not certain that they have a player exactly like Marvin Mims,
Yeah.
though I'm not 100% certain that they used Marvin Mims the right way anyway last year. So I kind of feel like we didn't even see the full potential of him, but he was very productive, and so I wonder if that production gets spread out among those transfer wide receivers, which I know we're about to talk about, or if that's Jaleel Farouk eating up a lot
Yeah.
of that. And I think that would be a good option for them.
Yeah, 100%. When you look at the recruits, they went out and got some guys. Overall rank was 6th in the nation, so composite there. Transfer rank was 8 as well. So they did go after the transfer portal pretty hard. Just a breakdown of their 23 class overall, they had 5 kids from Florida, 5 from Texas, 4 from Oklahoma. So they did go out there and address that. They really addressed their defense, but offensively, I think the big get was Jackson. Jackson is very good. Me and Christian talking about Jackson last November as being possibly the quarterback one of this class. That's how solid he is. He had a pretty good spring. I don't know what the hell is going on in their spring game scoring, but he did probably have like an 80-yard touchdown run. He did throw a touchdown pass that was pretty good. They addressed their offensive line there. Caden Green, Joshua Bates are pretty good. Dalen Smothers is an interesting prospect out there, 5'11", 182, kind of that scat back. Petaway is a guy that could get a little bit of run this year. He was not an early enrollee, but 5'11", 170. That might be your Marvin Mims replacement. Jacquees Petaway might be that guy for them. Overall, solid class. We know we like Arnold, but Arnold's probably going to have to wait a year.
Yeah, I wish he didn't though. What an exciting player to watch. I'm excited to
Yeah.
see him take the field. He is my QB1, and so I'm excited to see what happens with him. But yeah, you're right. I mean, they attack the interior offensive line, and I like Petaway quite a bit. I just, not being an early enrollee, sometimes those guys struggle to make an impact their freshman year. But down the stretch, I mean, that's kind of the meat of their schedule. So I wonder if by then Petaway has kind of worked himself into that wide receiver rotation.
I don't think it. Yeah, 100%. I don't think that room is as deep as like, oh, Petaway's never going to see the field, right? Like, I think that they get him out there. The one thing I will say, Jackson will be playing. Obviously, injury, yes, but if Jackson's playing in the middle of the year, that means something's going horribly wrong, probably for Oklahoma. Like they lost some games, they want to try to get some lifeblood in there. Jackson reminds me now, not as like a prospect in terms of like his size. I know that, so don't yell at me. Drake May kind of in terms of like his kind of, hey, got to maybe sit for a year behind Hal. Okay, hey, he comes out there, he's going to take control of this offense. He has that arm, he has that kind of ability. Like I could see him have that kind of rise that we've seen. So buy the dip now and then just wait because I definitely think it's going to come. When you're looking at the transfers, yeah, Brennan Thompson, Walter Rose, Andrew Anthony, Austin Stogner, talk about Rouse as well. I'm interested in Andrew Anthony. I like Andrew Anthony a lot, and that's because I'm a Michigan guy, as everybody knows in this channel by now. We didn't use him correctly at all. Like, so let's just be clear. Like, Michigan doesn't use their wide receivers we just don't use their wide receivers. It is what it is. That's just kind of how the program is. But I think he's got good size, 6'1", 192. He looked really good at times. Obviously, the big game against Michigan State where he had those 155 yards and 2 touchdowns. But if you're looking for a breakout, a kid that can just break out and be that guy for Gabriel, I think Andrew's that guy. And I think that's the guy getting slept on right now throughout the college football world.
Yeah, good player. I mean, he burst onto the scene. It was kind of like this, oh, look at this kid. He's the next big thing. And then he never really got on the field a whole lot after that. And so the guy I'm excited to see is Austin Stogner back. I think, the
Yeah.
South Carolina experiment didn't really work for him. I think he followed Rattler there and, he didn't have the production that I think he wanted. This is a guy that I thought was going to be a day 2 draft pick in the NFL draft at one
Yeah.
point. And I kind of, I must admit I didn't really catch up on all of my South Carolina film last year, so I'm not sure if that take still holds. But from a traits perspective, from a size perspective, hands, like yards after the catch, like this kid is good, and I think he provides something that maybe this offense didn't quite have last year with Braden Willis. So I feel like this is a new dynamic to their offense too.
Yeah, and Brandon Thompson, one thing I'll say about the Texas transfer, just fast. If they can figure out a way to just give him the ball, like he can kind of step up for them. When we're looking at impact players, though, I think it lands on Dylan. How is Dylan Gabriel going to look? How's this going to kind of go through? Can he kind of lead this team better than what he did last year? I love Barnes. I love Sawchuk. We put Farouk on here as well. Like all those guys, I got to give a shout out like Drake Stoops, really solid player. Bunkley Shelton, maybe former Arizona State kid. He can kind of step up there. Even Gavin Freeman, those guys. But these are your guys that get it going, and that running back room, right? Like that's going to be kind of the area they go. And you got Marcus Major still there, Tyree Walker, those guys. But I really feel like that running back room is what's going to this team's going to live by.
Yeah, and it's got to be. I think that's kind of like Eric Gray was a major reason why Dylan Gabriel was able to have success last year. I think that remains this year. I think Sawchuk's going to have to take a bigger role. I think Barnes is obviously going to have to shoulder a lot of that load as well. But yeah, I mean, this offense should be as dynamic as any in the Big 12.
All right. Let's talk about the defense because this is where it gets a little All right. So when we talk about the defense, no one really thought that the defense was going to be a problem with Brent Venables going, right? Like Lincoln Riley definitely wasn't known for his defensive presence, but hey, Venables is there. He's the guy. The Sooners allowed 30 points per game, ranking 99 nationally. They finished 122nd in total defense. They're only better than 9 teams in Division I football in total defense, which is just not good. And then I think it really you really showed out there when they lost 49-0 to Texas. Like that was one of the worst losses in the rivalry. And one of 5-time opponents piled 40+ points on them. So they just got bullied. And that's really what they talked about. Venables talked about that. We were getting bullied out there. They did address that. So they did it out in the portal and they kind of went and got that. But they've got to improve that defense or this is going to be another bad year.
It is. I think the weird part about this defense too is like they got decent play from a lot of players. It's just the collective didn't really mesh well.
Yeah.
Ethan Downs is a player that's returning that I think is actually a really good player and could be the foundation for a good defense. They've got a lot of transfers on this defense, obviously less than 50% returning, and I think as an Oklahoma fan, I think you've got to be excited that defense from last year isn't all returning. So I think last year was more of like an establish the scheme, establish the personnel type of year. This year they got guys that can kind of fit those roles. So I do think that they're in better shape than they were last year, but there are still a lot of familiar faces. So you're hoping for some development, some growth. But it was not a good group last year, like you said.
Yeah, one report I read was like, well, Danny Stutzman's coming back, and he led the Big 12 with 125 tackles, but we don't know if that's good or bad. That's what it said on the report. I'm like, oh, okay, that's where we're at here. I mean, I don't really think there's notable losses, really. Like, I mean, I put some guys on here based on draft capital and maybe the transfer portal. Clayton Smith, Derek LeBlanc, Bryson Washington, Deshaun White. No one really stood out to me like when I was doing this. It's like, oh my gosh, that's a huge loss for them. Like there was nothing there. Overall, even like Burt, the safety out there, he kind of transferred out. There's those guys, but nothing really did that. Clayton Smith went to Arizona State. Like these guys never necessarily produced for them.
Yeah, Deshaun White's probably the best player among that group. He played almost 1,000 snaps last year, and I think that is important, eating snaps and staying on the field. But outside of that, you're right. I mean, not a whole lot notable from that defense to lose, and so not a lot of notable losses.
All right, let's get into the recruiting. So this is where they attack this recruiting, this area here. I should have asked you how to pronounce this name. But Adebawari, I believe, is the edge, the big kid, 5-star kid, position number 2 overall. He's the guy, 6'4", 240, ready to come in and contribute. And I think Venables went after this kid. I do like Venables as a defensive coordinator. He's shown that he can do this, especially where Clemson always was good at the defensive line. Well, here's this guy. Here's his edge that he can do that with, a plug-and-play guy. Peyton Bowen is a big get for them out of Denton, Texas. I know they're really excited about him. And you just kind of go through it. I mean, I think they reloaded with guys that Venables wants. Remember, those Riley guys weren't necessarily what Venables wanted on that defensive line. And he went and targeted that. And they did a pretty good job there going through. I really like Lewis Carter as well. I think he's underrated from Tampa, 4-star kid. Good linebacker, can really step in there. Dave McCullough, safety out of there. Like, they really targeted. They did a great job. I think this is a really good class for Oklahoma.
Yeah, Josiah Wagner is projected to be their starting slot corner immediately.
Yeah.
And so that's an area I think Oklahoma traditionally has been willing to give freshmen snaps. And I think that if we are to see some freshmen on the field, it's going to be on this side of the ball this year. Obviously, we talked about Petaway, but I think, Wagner being on the field early, I think Adebawari being on the field opposite Ethan Downs actually gives you a nice little dynamic pass rush where you're feeling a lot better about that group than you were the group from last year. So this is a fantastic class. They did a really good job on this side of the ball, and I think this really pushed up that recruiting ranking into that top 6.
Oh, yeah.
Because this was the meat of it, right?
Yeah, come on, man. We know that these guys are going to play a lot because did you just hear the freshmen that the stats from last year? They got to plug and play some of these guys. They have to, and they have to hit on them. But they did go after the transport. I put them all in here for you guys out here. And you know a trend. Do you notice a trend that they went after? Defensive line, man. They really targeted that defensive line that they wanted to go out there and get. I think the big one's Deshaun McCullough, though. I mean, from Indiana. This kid is really, really good. And I know Deshaun was one of those highly sought after kind of linebackers, the out there. He had 30 solo tackles last year, 4 sacks, 6'5", 227, only a sophomore. So he's a guy that they can really kind of build around. Jacob Lacey as well from Notre Dame. Big kid, 6'2", 290. Like, they really went after these guys. Trace Ford as well. You can probably put him at an edge if you want to, but I just wanted to show you that from Oklahoma State. They went out and got guys. They got 3 recruits in the 90s in terms of transfer portal ratings. So they went out there and they shored up that defensive line.
Yeah. McCullough is the standout to me.
Yeah.
Very, very good player. I think too, when you look at, I talked about their linebacker position eating up snaps. He's a guy that is going to be on the field pretty much all the time. I think he walks in and is immediately I know Stutzman had a lot of, counting stats, but I think McCullough is probably their best linebacker. And that is the group that I think, if you improve that defensive line, and they certainly are trying to improve that defensive line, then that mop-up duty is really important, especially in the Big 12 and how those offenses run. So, yeah, I mean, this is a good strategy to just go load up on one position that you're kind of deficient in.
Yeah, and don't sleep on Rondell either. Bothroyd from Wake Forest. He had 14 sacks the last 2 years. So like they went out and got guys. Like they recruited well. So if Venables can put this together, I think the key point where Christian was talking about earlier, where he said like, hey, they just didn't gel. They just whatever the case, they had athletes out there, it just didn't gel. So that's that coaching staff now. Can that coaching staff get these pieces to fit? And I think that is the key. It's going to be a puzzle for them to do that. Impact players. I put Stutzman on here because of stats, and I hated reading that they say. I don't know if that's a good thing or not. So there's a little heart move there. I like Deshaun there. Rondo Berther, like I talked about. Peyton Bowen, I think, can step up and be out there as well. But again, I think collectively these guys really got to kind of step up together, and it's a collective whole. They got to be just better as a team, as a unit.
Yeah. I mean, that's it, right? I mean, I'm excited to see the new faces in this defense, but I'm excited to see how they gel because, like I said, that was the main issue last year. I think it's going to be better this year, especially as we get into their schedule. I think they have a nice little ease in before the big games. And so I think that's going to help develop that gel and that chemistry, which I think is going to help them in the long run and give them a shot to go 6-0, even though I feel pretty confident about 5-0, but 6-0 is the one, right?
Yeah. All right. Let's take a look. So let's dive into the schedule. Arkansas State should be a dub. SMU is interesting. That defense better be ready to go because I think SMU is going to be thrown around. You got to do that. Tulsa, Cincinnati. Cincinnati might. I'm gonna be honest with you guys. As Cincinnati fans, you might be the worst team out there I don't even. They're in the no. Are they? They're Big 12 now, huh?
They're Big 12, yeah.
Man, see, I got to keep up with this. You might be the worst team in the Big 12. Iowa State, Texas. Yeah, I mean, they should be, they're sitting there at 5-0. Iowa State just lost their quarterback to a betting scandal. Then you have Texas. That's the huge game. If they can beat Texas, they're in it. And then, like we talked about it earlier, like Texas should be the better team. But you know what? Sark loves to lose this game. Like, this is the game that Sark likes to lose. And so that's, I think, the question mark with them. UCF, Kansas, yeah, whatever. So when you look at the schedule overall, I think two tougher games, there's Texas and TCU. But after that, they can win every single one of those games.
If they beat Texas, they're in the playoff. And so we were talking about how I think this team's very underrated, despite, I think they're – what is this? Are we on team number 10? Are they 10th?
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah,
sounds about right. Yeah. But
11,
that still
feels
11. Okay. See, that feels low. I think they should be like a top 8 team. When you look at this schedule, I mean, like I said, I feel really good about 5-0, and then we get to Texas. I think that's very much so a toss-up, but that's going to be the game that decides what happens the rest of the way. Oklahoma State's a tough game, and I'm sure Kansas is going to, put up a good fight with the return of Jalen Daniels, but I don't really feel too worried about that. And then the rest of the schedule, even TCU, like I like what TCU did last year, but we talked about them already.
Yeah.
I just think that this could be, even if they drop Texas, then they're a one-loss, potentially, Big 12 champion at that point. Because I think that they would get the rematch against Texas, right? Is that?
Yeah.
I don't remember how all
they
these
got rid of.
conferences do.
They got rid of it. It's just the top 2 teams now.
Yeah. So I mean, if they get the rematch against Texas, they win that game. We're talking about a playoff team, and I think that that's an exciting, that's exciting prospects for a team that was so down last year.
Yeah, they're over-unders at 9.5. So Vegas thinks the same thing too. I would actually, man, it's tough because I do think if Gabriel goes down or something there, I want to say 9 is my number for them, but like I could see them going 10-2 or 11-1. So I'm gonna say slightly under, just because I do think maybe they have a hiccup, maybe Gabriel's there. But you know what? They could go 11-1 and maybe look dumb too. Like I do think that they have the talent to do that. But I'm gonna go a slightly under. Are you gonna go over?
I am. Yeah, this
Okay.
is the first one in a while that we have not picked the
we don't
same
agree on
thing. That's exciting. So, yeah, I mean, I think, if I'm being honest, I think they dropped Texas. I think Texas is a fantastic football team this year. So I'm sorry, Oklahoma fans. I do think that maybe you'll get them in the rematch, but I think they run the table outside of that, because I think that game being placed where it is lends itself to then running the table after that. So, yeah. Good football team, probably should be a top 8, top 7 team. Looking at the rest of the rankings,
I think they're a little underrated. I think they're underrated, and I think that they definitely can make the playoffs this year. I don't think that's out of the question. Like a lot of these teams, if they do that, yeah. And I think there's nothing more that Oklahoma would want to win the Big 12 the last year they're in it, just to kind of snub their nose before they go to SEC. If we're being honest, like we both know that's what Texas and Oklahoma want. They probably love to both be in the Big 12 championship too, as just at the end there before they go. But yeah, and overall, I think Venable is going to get this thing righted. I think that he did a great job in the recruiting trail. I think that if he can continue to get those top 7 classes, they're going to just be, fine. And again, we're not talking about a offensive-minded head coach. This is a defensive-minded head coach. He's got the offense figured out. He's got Levy there. He knows what he needs to do there. Defensively, I think he's going to progress, and I think that's the thing that you should be looking forward to as an Oklahoma fan.
Yeah, and then, moving forward, this team is set up fine for SEC play. And I think that that's an important part. The 2 teams going to the SEC from the Big 12, Texas and Oklahoma, they are building for that future, and they recruited as such. And so if you're an Oklahoma fan right now, I think it's a really exciting time. Obviously, it's going to be more difficult when you get to the SEC, but I think building off of potentially a playoff run the year before you get there will be pretty solid. You'll feel pretty good about that.
100%. All right. Appreciate it, Oklahoma fans. Hit that like and subscribe button. Let us know why we're dumb. It's all right. It helps the algorithm as well. So if you want to yell at us, go ahead. Drop a little nice comment if you want to. We'll check you guys in the next one.